My parents named me Alma. When I was a child, my mother told me that before I was born, I had no name but I already had a story. She would rest her palm against her belly and say, "You are becoming." She did not say, "You are," because I was not yet anything fixed. I was not a profession, not a temperament, not a believer or skeptic. I was not kind or cruel, brave or timid. I was simply a possibility gathering breath. It has taken me many years to understand what she meant. This is a story about a person named Daniel, but it is also about you, and about the quiet architecture that holds a human being together. It is about the invisible thread that runs from the first cry to the last exhale, weaving together memory, body, language, and choice into something we call identity. Daniel grew up in a small coastal town where the sea was both a boundary and an invitation. The houses were painted in fading pastels, and the wind carried salt and rumor in equal measure. In a place like that, everyone knew who you were before you did. You were the baker's son, the teacher's daughter, the quiet one, the loud one, the clever one, the troublemaker. Identity was assigned early and repeated often. Daniel was the thoughtful one. He asked questions that adults found inconvenient. Why did the tide obey the moon? Why did people pray if they were not sure anyone listened? Why did his father look tired even on Sundays? Questions, like pebbles, filled his pockets. As he grew older, Daniel noticed something strange. The way people described him began to shape the way he described himself. When teachers praised his curiosity, he leaned into it. When classmates called him distant, he began to guard his feelings more carefully. Words became mirrors, and he studied himself in them. This is the first layer of human identity, reflection. We become aware of ourselves partly through the eyes of others. A child sees delight on a parent's face and thinks, "I am delightful." A child sees irritation and thinks, "I am irritating." The self is not born fully formed, it is negotiated. Daniel's father was a fisherman who believed in effort more than introspection. "The sea doesn't care who you think you are," he would say. "It cares what you do." To him, identity was action. You were what your hands proved at the end of the day. Daniel tried to follow him onto the boat, tried to let the rhythm of nets and knots define him. But as the years passed, he realized that his father's truth was only partial. Yes, actions matter, but so do intentions, memories, and the stories we tell ourselves about why we act. One evening, after a long day on the water, Daniel asked his father, "If you stopped fishing tomorrow, who would you be?" His father laughed. "I would still be me." "But who was that?" Daniel pressed. His father had no answer, not because he lacked one, but because he had never separated the man from the motion. For him, the question felt unnecessary. Daniel carried that unanswered question into adulthood. When he left the coastal town for the city, he felt the first sharp fracture in his identity. In the city, no one knew his childhood name, no one remembered his awkward years or the way he used to collect seashells in his pockets. He was not the thoughtful one. He was simply a new employee at a publishing firm, a tenant in a narrow apartment, a stranger in crowded trains. At first, this anonymity terrified him. Without familiar reflections, who was he? But slowly, he began to see anonymity as a gift. If identity had been partially constructed by the expectations of others, then perhaps it could also be reconstructed. He experimented with small changes. He spoke more confidently in meetings. He introduced himself without mentioning his hometown. He chose clothes that felt less like camouflage and more like declaration. Each choice was a brushstroke on the canvas of self. Here lies the second layer of human identity, agency. We are shaped by circumstance, but we are not only shaped. We also shape. Identity is not a fixed sculpture, it is a living draft. In the publishing firm, Daniel worked with stories all day. He edited manuscripts written by people who believed their experiences deserved permanence. He noticed that every author, regardless of background, grappled with the same invisible question: who am I in this narrative? Some writers cast themselves as heroes, overcoming hardship with grit and grace. Others painted themselves as victims of cruel fate. Some were unreliable narrators of their own lives, omitting details that did not fit the version of themselves they preferred. Daniel began to suspect that identity is, at its core, narrative. We are the authors of a continuous autobiography, revised daily. Memory selects, arranges, and emphasizes. It chooses which moments to enlarge and which to shrink. One night, unable to sleep, Daniel tried an experiment. He wrote down 5 pivotal memories from his life: his first day of school, his first failure, the day his grandmother died, the afternoon he left home, the morning he fell in love. Then he rewrote each memory from a different angle. In one version, his first failure was proof of inadequacy. In another, it was evidence of courage. The same event, reframed, altered the tone of his entire life story. He realized then that identity is not merely what happens to us, but how we interpret what happens. Meaning is the glue. Years passed. Daniel fell in love with a woman named Mira, whose laughter sounded like sudden rain. Mira believed that identity was relational. You don't exist in isolation, she would say. You are different with me than you are with your colleagues. You are different with your mother than with a stranger. Which one is the real you? Daniel did not know. He noticed that with Mira, he was softer, more spontaneous. With his colleagues, he was analytical and composed. With his father, he reverted to a careful restraint. Each version felt authentic, yet incomplete. This is the third layer of identity, multiplicity. The self is not singular but plural. We contain variations that surface in different contexts. To insist on a single, unchanging core is to ignore the elasticity of being human. But multiplicity can be unsettling. If we are many selves, which one should guide our choices? The answer, Daniel learned, lies not in eliminating variation but in seeking coherence. Identity does not require uniformity, it requires alignment. The question is not, am I the same in every room? But, are my values consistent across rooms? When Daniel's mother fell ill, he returned to the coastal town. The sea was unchanged, relentless and patient. His father had grown smaller, his shoulders bowed by years of labor. Sitting beside his mother's hospital bed, Daniel felt the layers of his identity pressing against one another. He was a son, a partner, a professional, a thinker. None could be abandoned, yet one demanded precedence. In those quiet hours, he understood something new: identity is also responsibility. To be someone is to be accountable for the roles you inhabit. You cannot claim to be a loving son while neglecting the needs of your parents. You cannot claim integrity while betraying your principles in private. When his mother passed away, Daniel felt as if a chapter of his autobiography had been torn out. Grief altered his self-perception. He was no longer a person with two living parents. He was a son who had lost. Loss reshaped him, not by erasing previous layers, but by adding depth. Grief is a sculptor. It carves new spaces within us. After the funeral, Daniel walked along the shoreline alone. He remembered his childhood question: who would his father be without fishing? Now he asked himself, who am I without the people who defined me? He watched the tide recede, revealing rocks and seaweed that had been hidden moments before. Identity, he realized, is like the shoreline. It is formed at the meeting point of inner and outer worlds. When circumstances shift, new aspects are revealed. Over time, Daniel began teaching writing workshops in the city. He asked his students to describe themselves without mentioning their jobs, relationships, or achievements. The exercise was difficult. Stripped of external markers, many felt hollow. I don't know how to define myself, one student confessed. If I'm not my work, what am I? Daniel understood the fear behind the question. Modern life often encourages us to equate identity with productivity. But beneath occupation lies orientation. What do you care about? What moves you? What do you return to when the noise fades? He told his students, identity is less about what you do and more about what you consistently choose. Choices, repeated over time, become character. Character, expressed through action, becomes reputation. But at the root lies something quieter: intention. As the years unfolded, Daniel faced moral crossroads. In one instance, he discovered that a colleague had plagiarized a manuscript. Reporting it would protect the integrity of the publishing house but might ruin a career. Remaining silent would preserve harmony but compromise principle. In that moment, Daniel saw identity as a compass. Values are not decorative, they direct. He reported the misconduct, not with anger but with clarity. The decision cost him a friendship, yet it fortified his sense of self. Identity is tested most fiercely in private dilemmas. It is easy to claim virtue when unchallenged. It is harder to embody it when consequences loom. In middle age, Daniel experienced another shift. His father passed away, leaving behind a boat, a modest house, and a legacy of resilience. Sorting through his father's belongings, Daniel found an old notebook filled with weather logs and brief reflections. On one page, his father had written, "The sea teaches you who you are by showing you who you are not." Daniel read the line repeatedly. He understood it now. Identity is partly discovered through resistance. We learn our limits by encountering them. We learn our strengths by testing them. The world presses against us, and in the pressure, form emerges. Daniel decided to spend a summer in the coastal town, living in his father's house. Each morning, he walked to the harbor. He did not fish, but he listened. The creak of wood, the cry of gulls, the hush of waves against hulls, these sounds stitched past and present together. He realized that identity is temporal. We are not only who we are now, but who we have been and who we are becoming. The child collecting shells still lived within him, as did the young man seeking reinvention, as did the grieving son. Human identity is not a snapshot, it is a film. To freeze it at a single frame is to misunderstand its motion. One afternoon, a young boy approached Daniel on the pier. "Are you a fisherman?" the boy asked. Daniel hesitated. "No," he said. Then, after a pause, "But my father was." The boy nodded as if this answered everything. In that simple exchange, Daniel felt the continuity of lineage. Identity can be inherited not only through blood, but through memory and influence. We carry fragments of those who came before us, their gestures, their fears, their unfinished dreams. Yet inheritance does not equal destiny. Daniel did not become a fisherman, but he carried his father's discipline into his own craft. He did not replicate his mother's quiet patience, but he drew upon it in moments of conflict. As Daniel aged, he became less concerned with rigid definitions. He stopped asking, "Who am I?" as if the answer were a static label. Instead, he asked, "Am I living in alignment with what I value?" He found that identity, at its healthiest, is flexible yet anchored. Flexible enough to adapt to new information and changing circumstances, anchored enough to resist being swept away by every trend or opinion. In his later years, Daniel wrote a memoir. Not to immortalize himself, but to examine the threads that had woven his life. He wrote about the sea, the city, love and loss, ambition and doubt. He wrote about the moments he felt most certain and the moments he felt utterly lost. In the final chapter, he addressed an imagined reader. You may be searching for a definitive answer to the question of who you are. I cannot give you one. Identity is not a treasure buried at the end of a map. It is the act of walking the terrain. It is the way you respond to kindness and to cruelty. It is the stories you choose to believe about yourself. It is the promises you keep when no one is watching. You are shaped by your body, its strengths and vulnerabilities. You are shaped by your culture, its language and rituals. You are shaped by your relationships, those who see you clearly and those who misunderstand you. But within these influences, there is a quiet center from which you choose. Guard that center. Examine it. Let it evolve. You will be many things in one lifetime: child, friend, stranger, lover, rival, mentor, mourner. Do not cling too tightly to any single role. Each is a chapter, not the whole book. If you wish to know who you are, look not only at your reflection but at your direction. Where are you headed? What do you refuse to abandon? What do you forgive? What do you defend? The name you were given at birth is a beginning. The name you earn through your choices is the one that endures. When Daniel finished the manuscript, he felt neither triumphant nor complete. Instead, he felt ongoing. The story was written, but the self was still unfolding. In the end, human identity is a paradox. We long for certainty, yet we thrive in growth. We crave recognition, yet we fear confinement. We are singular and multiple, shaped and shaping, rooted and restless. Daniel's life did not provide a final answer to the question his mother implied before he was born. You are becoming, she had said. And that, perhaps, is the truest description of human identity. Not a fixed state, but a continuous emergence. Not a noun, but a verb. To be human is to stand at the intersection of memory and possibility, carrying yesterday's echoes while listening for tomorrow's call. It is to hold contradictions without collapsing, to change without disappearing, to remain accountable to the person you were while making room for the person you might yet become. If you listen closely, beneath your given name, beneath your titles and roles, you may hear a quieter voice. It does not declare a rigid definition. It asks a question: who are you choosing to be, now? And in answering that question, again and again, you write the story of your identity.